The stars over Glither's Vale were dying embers that night, scattered against the deep black. The wreckage drifted in slow motion, twisted metal still glowing from heat, silent bodies tumbling through nothing. Entire capital ships were machines. The size of cities were reduced to hollow shells in less than an hour. I was there. I saw it. And I tell you now, the galaxy has never been the same since. We thought we understood war. Every species in the galactic concord had their own history of conquest, rebellion, and defense. We thought we'd seen brutality, courage, sacrifice. But that was before the humans arrived, before they showed us what desperation can create, before they taught us the price they're willing to pay for victory. It wasn't their weapons that terrified us that day. It wasn't their ships, or their numbers, or even their strategy. No. What froze our blood was the realization that these strange, reckless creatures from a small blue world would destroy their own sky if it meant winning. I was assigned as a liaison officer aboard the Concord flagship, Luminara, tasked with observing the war's final engagement. At least, that's what we all thought it would be, just one more swift, clinical operation to end a minor uprising on the edge of civilized space. The humans had been outmatched from the start. We'd heard it in the council chambers: primitive drive systems, crude weapons, no understanding of Concord protocol. And yet, their colonies were stubborn, resisting far longer than projections allowed. The war began with the Dravari Dominion, a species we knew well, efficient, ruthless, and quick to crush dissent. When the humans' colony on Asterion 4 refused to hand over mining rights, the Dravari moved in. It should have ended there. A few transports of troops, a blockade, and the planet would have been forced to submit. But humans, they didn't surrender. They didn't even stall the way most lesser civilizations do when faced with superior force. Instead, they fought, and kept fighting, and somehow, they made the Dravari bleed for every scrap of ground. That was when the Concord stepped in. We weren't there to protect the humans. We were there to stop the mess from spreading. The humans had been part of the galactic community for just 14 standard cycles. They were still considered a curiosity, unpredictable, clever in odd ways, but lacking the discipline or resources of the great powers. Their homeworld was barely recovering from internal conflicts. When they first established colonies beyond their own star system, we told ourselves they were too young for war on this scale. The Concord Council decided to mediate the conflict. In truth, that meant imposing a solution by force. We gathered a fleet around Asterion 4, dozens of warships from across the member species, armed with the finest energy projectors, shield matrices, and tactical AIs. The plan was simple: blockade the planet, sever their supply lines, and wait. Hunger is a language every species understands from orbit. Asterion 4 looked almost fragile. It was a pale, clouded sphere, dotted with seas that shimmered under a faint sun. The colony itself was concentrated in sprawling cities along the equator. With the poles covered in deep ice caps, we could see their defensive satellites, crude but stubborn, holding position despite our warnings. I remember the first human transmission we intercepted. It wasn't a plea for mercy. It wasn't a demand for negotiation. It was music, some kind of old Earth composition, carried over open frequencies for all to hear. It didn't make sense. They weren't jamming us. They weren't encrypting anything, just playing sound into the void. It continued for days, different songs, sometimes broken by short, defiant messages. Asterion stands, we will not yield. The Dravari captains mocked it as a primitive form of propaganda, but I'd been in enough conflicts to know when an enemy refuses to speak of surrender, they're buying time for something. Our blockade was airtight. No ship in or out, no weapons capable of piercing our lines. The humans were outnumbered, outgunned, and by every tactical measure finished, and yet, they moved with purpose. Our long-range scans showed heavy industrial activity around the polar regions, but the thermal signatures didn't match any known weapon systems. They were mining ice. The Command Council on the Luminara dismissed it as desperation, an attempt to store fresh water before the siege starved them. But water, no matter how essential, would not save them from us. It was a delay, nothing more. Still, I watched the data streams, ship movements, cargo manifests. Something about it gnawed at me. The humans weren't hoarding resources. They were relocating them massive amounts of frozen mass loaded into orbital freighters. And those freighters weren't parked defensively over the cities. They were being tugged into strange, looping trajectories that took them close to their barren moon. Our analysts tried to calculate possible tactical uses. None of them made sense. A few Dravari commanders speculated it might be some crude attempt at asteroid redirection, a scare tactic. But to what end? Hurling ice at our ships would accomplish nothing. It was around this time that I began to notice the change in tone among the human broadcasts. The music stopped. The short, bold statements stopped. Now, silence reigned, broken only by occasional, terse instructions, always in their own language, never translated. Something was building, like the deep, tense breath before a strike. The Concorde fleet commander remained confident. Their resources are finite. Their morale is fading. It's only a matter of time. The Dravari captains agreed. The blockade tightened. We waited for the inevitable signal of surrender, but it never came. Instead, on the 23rd day of the siege, the first freighter lit its engines in a burn so powerful it registered as an energy spike across half the system. Others followed. Within minutes, moving in synchronized arcs like pieces in some grand, hidden game. They didn't flee. They didn't break the blockade. They positioned themselves. I could feel it then, an unease rippling through the bridge crew. We still didn't know what they were doing, but every instinct told me we were watching the opening of something we would not understand until it was too late. And I was right. The siege settled into a cold, grinding rhythm. Every few hours, the Concorde fleet would adjust its formation, just enough to remind the humans we were there, watching, waiting. The Dravari destroyers prowled the edges, like predators circling wounded prey. Our command center tracked every flicker of movement on the surface below, factories slowing to a crawl, heat signatures dwindling in residential districts, evidence of power rationing. From a tactical standpoint, the humans were already beaten. By the 6th day, our projections said they would be unable to sustain life support in many of the smaller settlements. By the 10th, their agricultural domes would be in crisis. Every other species we'd ever blockaded had broken before that point, sending desperate messages, offering terms, pleading for food or evacuation. The humans sent nothing. No surrender request, no negotiation. Just silence. Our ships monitored their comms relentlessly, and when transmissions did come, they were strange short bursts of encrypted chatter between ground stations and the orbital freighters. Not military codes, at least not any we recognized. More like logistical manifests, coordinates, and strange recalculations. The Dravari dismissed it as panic-driven supply management, but I had seen enough battlefronts to recognize planning when I saw it. Down on Asterion 4, life moved under a shroud of tension. Our orbital scans picked up columns of vehicles moving toward the poles. The humans were stripping equipment from their own cities, industrial drills, grav loaders, entire sections of fusion plants, hauling it all north and south. They weren't evacuating civilians, as any sane species would under siege. They were consolidating. The poles themselves became a hive of activity. Ice harvesters cut deep into glaciers that had been untouched for centuries, pulling out titanic blocks of frozen mass and feeding them into orbital launchers. The first time I saw it on the tactical display, I thought it had to be a mistake. They weren't hiding this from us. Every movement was in plain view. The Luminaris council room was split over the meaning. The Concorde commander argued it was a bluff, a crude display meant to intimidate. You can't win a siege with ice, he said, his voice calm, certain. The Dravari commander, less patient, proposed an immediate orbital bombardment of the poles to destroy whatever they were building. That suggestion was denied. The Concorde didn't destroy colonies if it could avoid it. Too many reputations, too much public image at stake. And so we waited. Each day, the human freighters took on more of the polar ice. At first, they stayed close to the planet, maneuvering slowly in tight orbits. But soon, they began looping farther out, always passing close to their barren moon. On my console, the orbital paths formed strange spirals and slingshot curves. It didn't match any standard evacuation or defensive protocol. Then came the 9th day, when something changed. we intercepted a faint, low-frequency pulse from the moon's far side. Not natural, not random. It was a deliberate signal, timed with one of the freighter's passes. The ship adjusted course slightly, just enough to line up with a new trajectory. The moon, once an irrelevant gray sphere in the background of our scans, suddenly felt important. I started spending more of my shifts watching the moon. The surface was scarred and cratered, but there was movement, their thermal signatures so faint you'd miss them. Without knowing where to look, the humans had built something under our noses. On the 12th day, the Dravari sent a scout corvette closer to investigate. It didn't come back. Our sensors recorded a sudden spike of kinetic energy, a flash, and then debris tumbling through space. The official report claimed the ship struck an uncharted asteroid fragment. I didn't believe that for a second. The humans weren't just playing for time, they were laying a trap. By now, the tension aboard the Luminara was thick. Officers moved quietly. Conversations dropped when I walked into a room. The fleet commander maintained his calm facade, but his orders came faster, sharper. He knew something was building, even if he wouldn't admit it aloud. On the 17th day, the pattern finally emerged. The humans were using the moon's gravity to slingshot their freighters into higher and higher velocities, each pass shaving precious hours off the time it would take to reposition. But that alone wouldn't save them. It was what they were. Carrying that unsettled me hundreds of thousands of tons of polar ice, locked into reinforced containers, riding those freighters like ammunition. Why ice? Why not rock, or metal, or explosives? The answer came, in part, from the intercepted chatter between their ships, phrases like fragmentation cascade and target saturation, terms I'd heard before in asteroid defense training, not in siege warfare. The realization struck like a cold blade. They weren't building a weapon to strike a single ship or even a fleet. They were preparing something far less precise and far more devastating. Our blockade remained in place, but I could sense the unease spreading. The Dravari ships kept a slightly wider berth from the moon now. Patrols doubled, as if we could somehow box in the humans' intentions. But how do you blockade a plan you don't yet understand? The broadcasts from the surface had grown even stranger. No more music, no defiant slogans, just occasional bursts of static-laden speech, impossible to translate through the encryption. The Concord's linguists worked day and night, but without context. It was guesswork. All we knew was that the humans were counting down to something. I tried to warn my superiors. I told them the freighter trajectories were converging toward a single orbital window, one that would put our entire formation in their path. I told them the ice could be used as raw mass for kinetic bombardment, even against shielded ships. My warnings were met with polite dismissal, even if they tried. The energy required to make ice dangerous in space is astronomical. One officer said they don't have the technology for precision targeting at those speeds. Another added. I wanted to tell them they were thinking like Concord officers. The humans didn't need precision. They didn't need elegance. All they needed was chaos. The 18th day brought the first direct move against us. One of the smaller human freighters broke formation and burned hard toward the blockade. The Dravari interceptors pounced, shredding it with pulse fire before it came close. From the debris, our sensors picked up nothing but twisted metal, shattered containment tanks, and clouds of ice crystals. The Dravari laughed at the futility of the attack. I didn't laugh. The freighter had been empty, which meant it wasn't an attack, it was a test. And the humans had just confirmed how close they could get before we reacted. By the 20th day, the moon's surface lit up with new heat signatures. Whatever had been hidden there was now fully active. Our sensors detected structural collapse across several craters, like demolition charges going off in sequence. Yet no debris escaped. Everything was being pulled into massive containment rings. The readings didn't match any weapon in our archives. The freighters moved into their final positions, now in a perfect arc across the planet's far side. They were lined up not defensively, but offensively, as if waiting for a signal. I couldn't shake the feeling that the humans were about to gamble everything, even their own survival. The 21st day began like all the others, silent, cold, and tense. But I could feel it in my bones, in the air aboard the Luminara. Something was coming. The bridge crew moved faster, glancing more often at their consoles. The fleet commander's voice was clipped, precise. Even the Dravari captains, usually arrogant and impatient, had stopped their mocking commentary. At for 19 ship time, the moon lit up. It began with a deep, subsonic tremor that rippled through our sensors, of vibration that didn't belong in the vacuum of space, yet made every console shudder. Massive containment rings on the moon's surface, previously dormant, began to spin. They tore through the thin crust, drawing up vast quantities of rock, dust, and ice from beneath. The moon was breaking apart. We scrambled to make sense of the readings. The gravitational stress from the containment rings was tearing fissures into its core. Entire mountain ranges fractured and collapsed inward. It wasn't an accident, it was deliberate. The humans were mining their own moon to death. The freighters, now fully loaded with their polar ice cargo, began their final burn. They accelerated along pre-calculated slingshot paths, arcing around the collapsing moon. The gravitational assist hurled them into velocities that no Concorde vessel would dare attempt, speeds at which shields became useless, where even a pebble could punch through a warship's hull like a railgun slug. And these freighters were carrying millions of tons of ice. I realized then the true genius and horror of the plan. Ice wasn't chosen for its hardness or density. It was chosen because, at those speeds, it would fragment into trillions of microscopic shards. Shards too small for shield generators to deflect, too numerous for targeting systems to track. Against metal or rock, we could have adapted. Against a frozen tidal wave moving at terminal velocity, there was no defense. This wasn't a weapon aimed to destroy a ship or two. This was a weapon aimed to erase fleets. The first freighter cleared the moon's shadow and entered our formation's outer perimeter. The fleet AI identified it as a high-speed threat and ordered immediate intercept. But by the time the closest ships realigned for a shot, it had already passed. Then it detonated. Not in a fiery explosion. There was no heat, no flash, no dramatic flare. Instead, its containment systems failed by design, releasing its entire mass into space. In seconds, a dense cloud of ice particles, each no larger than a fingernail, filled the void. At the speeds it was traveling, that cloud became a planetary scale. Sandblaster, the Dravari destroyer Bloodfang, took the first hit from the bridge of the Luminara. I watched in stunned silence as its shields flared once, twice, and then collapsed entirely. The hull, armored to withstand plasma fire, was shredded. In seconds, holes bloomed across its surface. Entire decks vented atmosphere in bright, fleeting bursts before the ship broke apart, spilling glowing debris into the darkness. Panic spread instantly through the Concorde formation. Ships broke ranks, maneuvering wildly to avoid the incoming debris clouds, but the humans had timed everything perfectly. The second freighter's cloud was already on approach, cutting off escape vectors. The blockade's tight formation, the very thing meant to keep the humans trapped, had now become a death trap. The moon continued to collapse. With every rotation of the containment rings, new fragments were hurled outward, each one caught and accelerated by the humans' freighters. Before being released, it was like watching a planet-sized shotgun being fired over and over again, aimed directly into the heart of our fleet. The Luminara's shields held against the first wave, but barely. The sound, if you can call it that, was a strange low vibration through the hull as trillions of impacts rippled across the ship's surface. Warning klaxons screamed as our shield integrity dropped to 40%, then 28%. The captain's voice cut through the chaos. All ships full withdrawal. Break formation. But it was already too late. The humans had anticipated our retreat vectors. A third freighter emerged from the far side of the moon, its engines burning hotter than anything I'd seen from their technology before. It cut across the only clear escape lane and detonated its payload. In the chaos, I caught sight of something through the forward viewport, a small, human corvette, running cold and dark, hovering just beyond the debris field. It wasn't attacking. It wasn't even moving. It was watching us, recording. The humans didn't just want to win. They wanted us to remember. The destruction was surgical in its randomness, no targeting, no precision, just pure environmental annihilation. Ships that tried to hide behind others were shredded alongside them. Smaller craft were pulverized. Instantly, the Dravari flagship, pride of their fleet, lost both its primary drives in the second wave, and began tumbling helplessly toward the planet. Below, on the moon, the containment rings reached their final cycle. With a groaning, seismic shudder, the entire satellite cracked in half. Chunks the size of mountains floated free, immediately captured by the humans' improvised slingshot system and flung toward our position. The fleet was no longer a fleet. It was a scattering of crippled survivors, each desperately trying to outrun a storm they couldn't see. I don't know how long it lasted. Time loses meaning when you're watching your entire command structure dissolve into chaos. But at some point, the freighters stopped moving. The last debris wave passed us by, drifting harmlessly into deep space. The humans had finished their work. The fleet limped away, leaving the humans in possession of their battered, half-frozen world. The Concorde commanders called it a tactical withdrawal, but every officer who had been there knew the truth. We hadn't been defeated. We had been warned. They had sacrificed their moon-an irreplaceable celestial body that had shaped their tides, their culture, their history, not as an act of desperation, but as a deliberate, calculated strike. And it worked. When the Concorde Council met in emergency session, there was no appetite for continuing the war. The humans hadn't just survived, they had demonstrated a willingness to go further, to burn away their own sky if it meant taking their enemy with them. In every language of every species in the galaxy, there is a word for victory. In human tongues, there is also a word for something else. A word I learned that day. Pyrrhic. We left Asterion for behind, but the image of that dead moon, its shattered remains glittering like a frozen halo above the planet, stayed with me, and I think it always will. We did not regroup in formation. We did not reform ranks. We fled. Some of us limped on crippled drives, others drifted in silence, venting sparks and atmosphere into the void. The survivors scattered like prey animals after a predator's strike. The fleet's proud lines of warships, each a symbol of Concorde's superiority, were reduced to a broken, chaotic swarm. The comm channels were a storm of voices, some screaming orders, others calling for help. Entire ships had gone silent, lost in the frozen maelstrom that the humans had unleashed. The Dravari, for all their cold-blooded arrogance, had no words now. Their most feared war captains sat in silence on their shattered bridges, staring at their tactical displays, as if the numbers themselves had betrayed them. I remember looking back over my shoulder, toward Asterion 4, expecting to see only wreckage and smoke. Instead, I saw the planet turning slowly beneath the shattered remains of its moon. It wasn't just debris, it was a monument, a glittering halo of destruction, each fragment catching the light of the distant sun. The pieces were still drifting outward like the petals of some great, dead flower. And at the center of it, the humans' orbital stations damaged, yes, but still holding. They had done this knowing full well that they had no replacements, no backup. They had done it knowing that their moon could never be rebuilt, that the tidal shifts would scar their world for centuries to come. They had done it because they knew the alternative was worse, and we had seen it. All of us had seen it. There's a particular kind of silence that comes after witnessing something your mind struggles to accept. It's not the absence of sound, it's the absence of denial. That's what filled the Luminara's bridge in those moments. No one argued. No one suggested regrouping for another strike. The very idea was gone. The official Concorde report would later call it the Asterion maneuver, but among the crews who survived, we called it something else. The day the sky burned. The retreat was not organized. It was survival, pure and simple. Ships jumped out as soon as their drives were stable enough to make the attempt. Some didn't wait for full synchronization, risking catastrophic misjumps just to put distance between themselves and that broken moon. When we finally reached the Concorde assembly, in orbit around Vera Prime, the council chamber was already in uproar. Reports had trickled in, fragmented, panicked, and unbelievable. Some officers claimed the humans had discovered a new superweapon. Others swore it was some kind of suicidal bluff. The truth, as I told it, was simpler and far more dangerous. They didn't outgun us. I said before the council, they didn't outrun us. They outwilled us. The room quieted. They took what they had: freighters, mining rigs, ice. A moon, and turned it into something no one in this chamber ever imagined. They gave up part of their own world to keep it free. Tell me, what other species here would do that? No one answered. The Dravari delegation wanted vengeance. Of course, they always do. But even they spoke with caution now. They had seen the humans' resolve firsthand, and it haunted them. The Concord was built on the assumption that wars could be managed, that enemies would behave according to patterns. The humans had shattered that illusion. Within a week, an armistice was signed. Not a treaty the humans refused one, but a mutual disengagement. The Concord pulled its fleets back from human territory, citing logistical reevaluation. The Dravari grumbled, but obeyed. Asterion IV remained scarred. Without its moon, the oceans began to shift in unpredictable patterns. Coastal cities faced flooding, and entire ecosystems were thrown into turmoil. Yet when the first Concord observers returned months later, they found the humans rebuilding not just their cities, but their resolve. Their propaganda broadcasts, once aimed only at their own people, now reached across the stars. Messages in every known language, simple and direct. We will endure. It wasn't bluster. It was a promise. The Concord didn't try another blockade. Not there, not anywhere in human space. The lesson of Asterion IV spread faster than any treaty could. Captains spoke of it in hushed tones over drinks in orbital bars. Admirals referenced it in strategic briefings as a cautionary tale. Even pirates steered clear of human convoys, because everyone now understood the truth. Humanity wasn't dangerous because of their weapons or their numbers. They were dangerous because they could look at something irreplaceable, something that had been theirs since before they could write and decide to destroy it for the sake of tomorrow. Years have passed since that day, but I still see it when I close my eyes. The broken moon, the ice clouds ripping through fleets, the unshakable silence of the humans who had pulled the trigger. I've studied their history since then. I've read about their ancient wars, their desperate gambles, the way they turned disasters into rallying cries. They've burned cities to save nations. They've sunk their own ships to deny an enemy's victory. On Earth, they have a saying, if we can't have it, neither can you. In the council chambers, there's talk again of human expansion, of colonies pushing further into Concord space, of disputes over resources. Some of my colleagues argue we should confront them early, before they grow too bold. I don't speak during those debates. I've already seen where that road leads. Because here's the truth that the galaxy learned at Asterion IV. You can match a human ship for ship. You can outgun them, outnumber them, outmaneuver them, but you will never outlast them. They are not bound by the same limits we are. They will fight for the last breath, the last stone, the last drop of water. And if victory demands the impossible, they will make it possible no matter the cost. So when the new cadets ask me what happened that day, I don't tell them about the orbital mechanics or the kinetic energy calculations. I tell them about the look in the humans' eyes when they realized they could win by losing something precious. And I tell them this: if you ever see a human willing to burn their own sky, you run, and you don't look back, because that's not a battle anymore. That's the end of the world yours.